Hi, this is Valerie Smith here. We'll be talking today about how to use Google Sheets. So this is the second class we're going to be doing. Our first class, we talked about what Google Sheets was and how it worked. Just to do a quick refresher, Google Sheets is Google's freely available spreadsheet program. It's very similar to Microsoft Excel. And so here we have our spreadsheet. And in case you don't remember, spreadsheets are divided into a series of rows and columns. Columns are all identified by a letter. The rows are all identified with a number. The intersection of a row and column is called a cell, and a cell will be identified by the letter of the column it's in and the number of the row. So for example, this cell right here, it's cell E6 because it's in column E, row 6. Now, one more concept we're going to talk about is a cell range. And a cell range is any group of cells, any group of contiguous cells that are touching each other. And you can select them in multiple ways. Clicking and dragging, clicking in one, holding down the Shift key, and clicking in another one. But the important thing about a cell range is that it's identified by the cell in the top left corner and the bottom right corner. So this particular cell range, selecting right here, would be C5 colon G8, because this is cell C5 and this is cell G8. And those cells all selected together would be the cell range C5 colon G8. And we'll be using cell ranges later on in our formulas we'll be doing for this class. Okay, so what we have here in our spreadsheet is a series of grades. We have a group of students. Go down, we have about 45 of them. And then we have about 15 tests that they've taken. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be calculating the average. We're going to be doing some formatting on the sheet so it's easier to read. And then we're going to be doing some work with multiple sheets in the spreadsheet. But for right now, we're going to be working just with this sheet. Yes, Vera, what's your question? Gonna have to unmute yourself.
Is this considered a webinar or a meeting?
This is a webinar.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now we're on to, let's do a little bit of work on the formatting of the sheet. And to start with, we're just going to make it so this top row here stands out a little bit. So I'm going to select these cells. And then I'm going to do a little bit of shading using the paint bucket icon here. I'm going to change it to blue. And then I'm going to change the text color right here to white, so it stands out. And I'm going to make them bold as well. So this makes that row a lot easier to see. Okay. We're also going to adjust the column width. These first two columns are a little too crowded. So we're just going to do a quick fix here, and we're going to do an auto fit. And we're going to do that by double clicking right on this line between the two column letters. And that just spreads out the columns a little bit so we can read it a little bit clearer. Okay, so one of the problems you sometimes have with spreadsheets, especially ones that are very big like this, is that if you're trying to find a specific number, you can't really figure out what it is. So for example, if I click in this cell here, or over here, it's really hard to see what student I have and what test it is. You have to do a lot of scrolling back and forth, and it's easy to get confused. Fortunately, there's a way you can make this much simpler, and that's by doing what's called freezing panes. And freezing panes is pretty much a view option, meaning it only changes what you see. It doesn't really make changes to the spreadsheet itself, although there is a slight difference in that you'll see a little bit later in the class. So right here, we're going to click in this cell, and we're going to make it so that regardless of where we scroll in our spreadsheet, we'll always be able to see the top row with the test numbers and the students' names. So from here, we're going to click into that cell because we want to freeze everything above it and to the left. We're going to click on View, and we're going to go to the Freeze option. And then we're going to pick our row option here, which would be one row. Then we're going to pick our View option here for the columns, which would be up to the current column right there. Oh, actually, nope, we want the two columns. I'm sorry. You just want the 2 columns. There we go. Okay, so now we have this freezing in place, and you'll notice now there's a thick line here and here. And as we scroll through, notice that column and that first row won't move. So if we go here and look at a cell here, it's fairly easy to see we're looking at Kia Min score for test 13. So this makes it a lot easier to identify what you're looking at without having to scroll back and forth. So when you're done, so if you're done freezing panes and you don't want this to be the panes to be frozen anymore, just go to the view option, go to freeze, and then just say no. You can just turn it off and on. It doesn't affect the sheet. Okay, so now we're going to work on averaging our test scores for our students. And we have 15 tests here. And we want to start by clicking in the cell where we want our answer to be. So we're going to start right here. And we're going to use the equals average formula rather than writing out the formula. So that would be equals, type the word average. And you'll notice that Google Sheets is already giving us suggestions. In particular, it's saying we're looking at the sheet, we're seeing what you have it, how it's have it set up, and we're going to suggest you do the average of cells C2 through Q2, which is exactly what we want, so we don't have to type out the whole thing. We can just click here to get our formula in place and then hit enter. It's also making another suggestion. It's looking at our sheet and says, why don't you autofill? Which again, we want to, because we want to have all the students have their grades in. And we're just going to click here. And now we're going to autofill and fill this in for all the rest of the students very easily. Okay, but we have a lot of decimal places here. And we really don't need them for grades. So we're going to get rid of them. We're going to select the column. And then we're going to use the, oh, there it is, the decrease decimal places button. So it's right here. And you just click on it until you get rid of all the decimal places. So now we have our average all calculated. It's nice and in 2 digits. And we're all set with this particular sheet. Okay. Except for one little problem. Our students here are not in alphabetical order. So we're going to get them into alphabetical order. We're going to do this by just clicking on a cell. Then we're going to go up to the data option and go to sort sheet by column A to Z. And it's going to do that for us. So now our students are in correct alphabetical order. And notice that it didn't include the last name, first name part of when it was doing the alphabetical sort. You do have to be a little bit more careful in Google Sheets with this than you would in Excel. Excel tends to not include things like last name, first name in an alphabetical sort without you doing any extra steps. Our actually freezing that made it so that Sheets wouldn't include it. If we hadn't had these cells frozen up here, this first row frozen, Sheets would include that in the sort. So in some ways, the freezing is mostly a view thing, but it can affect when you're doing things like sorting. Okay. Yes, Vera, what's your question?
Do you have an example of how that works with the first 2 columns staying the same? Because what I missed is, I'm not sure that all of the data stayed with the first and last name.
Well, yeah, it did. That's when you sort a sheet, that's what it does. That's what sort does.
Right, but in this case, the first line is frozen. So how does it know I want the first 2 columns? I'm sorting by the first column.
I specifically said in the command, it's sort sheet by column A to Z.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that was a specific part of it that was there.
Gotcha. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, so our students are in alphabetical order. We have our sheet all set. But we're going to move on now to the part where we move into multiple sheets. And when you create a spreadsheet, you can have multiple sheets within it. You typically in Excel files called a workbook. Google Sheets does not use that terminology, but the same principle applies. You can have more than one sheet in your spreadsheet. So here we go. We're going to take a look at sheet 2. And here is sheet 2. And on sheet 2, we have the midterm and final grade for these students. We also have their names here, but notice that their names are not in alphabetical order. So we're going to put them in alphabetical order so their midterm and final grades will be able to line everything up right. So again, we're going to click here and we're going to go to data and we're going to go to sort sheet. But notice if I do it here, I didn't have those cells frozen. So it did that where it changed the other cells as well. So we're going to undo that. See, it clicked last name down here. So that's obviously not going to work. So we're going to undo that. Where's undo? There it goes. And we're going to first freeze this top row here. And we're also going to have a little bit of a problem here because we have this section here, which is going to become important later on in our testing, later on when we do our formula. This is the grade weighting section. And I'm actually going to be moving this to an additional sheet. So I'm going to take this out here and cut it. I'm going to add a sheet to my spreadsheet and paste it in there. And we're going to be using this later on for our average formula. Okay, so now we're going to sort our students into the proper order. Again, it's the data, sort sheet by column A to Z, and there we go. Okay, so now we have our students in the proper order. I'm actually just going to move our grade weighting back into its place. I'm going to keep it on. This could be, when we get to the formula we're using this for, this can be in more than one place, but I think the formula is easy to see if it's on the same sheet as opposed to going between two sheets, though you could have it on another sheet as well. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to get the test scores from this sheet over to this sheet in this column. And we're going to be doing that by using something called a sheet reference. And a sheet reference is essentially a formula that says take whatever in this cell on this sheet and display it in this cell on this sheet. So it's a very simple formula. We're going to put it in here. Actually, before we do that, we are going to rename our sheets. So I'm going to rename this one from sheet 1 to tests. So that's been renamed. Now we're going to go to sheet 2. And we're going to put in equals. And then we're going to navigate simply to the cell that has the information we want to appear here. So we're going to go to the test sheet, and we're going to go into his cell for test 1. Oh, sorry, no, we want his average. Hold on. Average. So that's equal tests, exclamation point. You put an exclamation point after the name of the sheet, followed by the cell, which is R2. And there we go, it's moved that over. We can also use autofill to fill this in for the rest of the sheet, like that. So now we have the information from sheet 1, or now it's called tests, coming over to sheet 2. So now we have their average grades is here. And the reason why this is helpful, as opposed to putting in numbers, is that we can now, if we make a change to a test grade in here, it'll show up in the other sheet. So for example, so we see here on sheet 2, Caden's test scores were 75. We're going to go here and we're going to say, we're going to adjust one of his scores. We're going to change test 2. Usually I like to fail him, but I'm going to be nice today and give him 100 on that test. And that will recalculate the average, and he gained a point. Not much of a difference, but you do see here that it did change the number, and the calculation went all the way through the different sheets. Okay, so now we're going to be working on calculating their final grade. Yes, Vera?
In the reference for equals tests, which is the name of the sheet 1, exclamation point R2,
Yes.
is that row 2 on a different sheet? What is the R2 referencing?
R2 is referencing the cell. So we're here at cell R2.
Okay, got you. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Just so, Anne, I noticed you came in a little late. If you have any questions, just click on the raise hand button. And I'll unmute you as well. Okay, so we have here, we've gotten this over here. We're now going to be calculating his final grade. And instead of doing a straight average of these three numbers, we're going to be doing a weighted average, where his tests count for 50% of his grade, his midterm for 25, and his final for 25. And the way you do a weighted average in Google Sheets is you start by typing in the formula, which is average dot weighted. So you see it right here, the weighted average. And then you're going to put in the cells and you're going to enter in your cells. So the way you do this is you put in the cell that's going to be the number that's going into the average. You put a comma, and then you put the cell that has what the weighting is. So in this case, it's tests, it's 50%. We're going to click in this cell here, L3. We do that again, comma, for the midterm, cell D2, comma, and then the weighting for the midterm is 25%, comma again, final, comma, the weighting for the final is 25%. So again, it's the cell with the grade in it followed by the cell with the weighting in it. And you just alternate them through the formula. I'm going to hit the enter key, and that's going to calculate our average there. Okay, so we have our weighted average done here. Let's use autofill to fill this in. And that's not working. So you see here we're getting this hashtag value. And this is what happens because when you use autofill, Sheets will look at where this original cell is placed in the spreadsheet and where all the cells it references are also placed. And then when you move it to when you copy it to a new location, it changes all of those references based on the new location. And in our case, what that means is it's taking cell C3, which is Felix's test scores, but the average for the weighting is going to cell L4, which is actually this cell here, which would be the midterm weighting. And where this really becomes a problem is this last one here, which is cell L6, which is empty. And that means Sheets is looking at it and going, there's nothing in there. We can't calculate the average. And if you look through the other formulas going further down, you'll notice you go L8, L9, L10, get down here, we're L11, L12, L13. So obviously we can't use autofill in the same way here. So, but that doesn't mean we need to type out the formula 45 times for each student. We can still use autofill. We just need to make an adjustment to our original formula so that it says, regardless of where it's located in the sheet, you will get the weighting from this particular cell. It's making it into what's called an absolute cell reference. So I'm going to delete these. And we're going to go back to our original formula in the cell here. So right now it says average weighted, and we have the cell followed by the weighting. So we want to make a change to that weighting. We want to make it say, okay, so regardless of where this moves, it's going to go to cell L3. And the way you make a cell reference absolute is you type a $sign before the letter and before the number in it. So I'm going to make that change to L3, L4, and finally cell L5. So what this means is these will not change regardless of where we copy the formula to in the spreadsheet. And we're going to do this. Now let's do the autofill. And notice this time it calculated correctly because it could figure out where the numbers were going. So if we look at, say, this cell here, you'll notice it says C6, but also L3, L4, and L5, referencing right there that grade weighting. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on that? Okay, no questions? We're just gonna get rid of the decimal places for the grades here. Again, select them all, and I'm just gonna use the reduced decimal to get rid of them. Yep. Okay. Okay. So we're now going to be doing a few more formatting changes to this particular spreadsheet. We're going to start with the top row again. And we're just going to go here and we're going to do the shading again. Go with a lighter blue this time. I'm going to make the text bold. Okay. Then we're going to adjust the column width. We're not going to use auto fit for these. Instead, we're going to set it so all the columns are the same width. So I'm going to select the columns we want to change. So that would be A through F. And then I'm going to go up here to format and sorry, this command is in a slightly different place and I always forget where it is. Tools? No, I think it's format. Or is it edit? Let's try this again. Where did that command go? All right, so we'll ask help. Where's resize? Not listed. Okay, then. I'm sorry, this command has seemingly disappeared. It's got to be here somewhere. Not number, font size. All right, okay, now I remember. It's not in any of the menus, which is, I think, really confusing. You have to right click in the column area and then go to resize there. Not terribly easy to find. So let's try 100. This is the width in pixels. Yeah, that actually looks pretty good. So if you want to adjust the column width so that they're all the same, you have to right click on the column. Silly place to put it. So next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to center align these as well. And the alignments are right here, there, and go to center. Okay. And let's see, we're also going to make the names of our students bold as well. Again, it's select them all, and then just click on the B there. And now we're going to put in some borders. So we're going to start by putting a thick border around all the cells. So we need to select all of them. There we go. And then the border command is here. And you first start by, you can change the color if you want. We're not going to do that. But you can change the width. So I'm going to make this a heavier width. And then I'm going to put the outer borders all around it. Then I'm going to select everything except for that first row. So I want to put some thin borders in between all our cells. And again, we're going to go to the border command. We'll change the weight back to the thin line. And then we'll click here for the inner borders option. She must not have been included. So let's just do her. Yep. Borders can be a bit weird when you're doing it because it starts toggling things on and off. There we go. So now we have all our borders in place. Okay. So before we move on to the filtering, does anyone have any questions? Okay, so no questions. We're going to now look at filtering. And when you do filtering, first you need to click in the data you want to filter. And you go to data, and then you go to create a filter. And you see here, you now have these little drop downs next to everything at the top row. And you can use these to do lots of different things with your data. First thing you can do is you can say, who has the highest grade? So if it goes sort A to Z, actually that would be sort Z to A. We get the highest grade in the class, which would be Nasana Dantius. If you wanted to know, say, who got the highest test score, same thing, and that would be Felix and a couple other people, Alistair and Tally as well. If you wanted to know, say, which students got between, say, 80 and 85 on your 80 and 85 on their tests, their midterm. We're going to clear them, so we just take the ones we want. And we're interested in 80 to 85, so we just check here, 80, 82, and 83. Click OK. And now we're seeing only the students whose grades were in that particular range of values. Now, when you use filters, those cells do not disappear. They are still there. They're just hidden from view for the moment. And when you're done with filters, you can then go here, turn them off, and your test goes back to the way it was. Although you'll notice it's still in the last order we put it in, so we want to get it back into alphabetical order. I'm just going to use the filters to do that. I'm just going to turn them back on for the moment. Go to last name, go sort A to Z, and now they're back in alphabetical order. Okay, so any questions on that? This particular set of data is not particularly demonstrative of what you can do with filters. They can be very, very useful especially when you have larger and more complicated sets of data to figure out what's going on with them. Okay, so we're going to move on to printing right now. So, hold on. I'm turning the freezing off for the moment. Okay. So let's go to printing. So I'm going to click on File, and let's see, we're going to print down here. And we have here sort of what our sheet is going to look like. And it's not bad. We have everyone's here around here. We unfortunately have this hanging out over here, and we'll be doing something about that in a moment. Using scaling. And you also see here, if you go down to our second page, we're seeing some of our data has gone over to the second page. Okay. Vera, you just kind of got to take it on faith that that's what it's doing. It is. Even if you're not seeing it, trust me, when you're using a filter or you're doing a sort, unless you make the mistake of selecting just one column. So if you select, say, let's do this column. If I just select this column, and if I only select a section of it and then do a sort on it, it's only, well, this is a little, Google Sheets is a little different than Excel in this, but here you see you have your option short sheet by column B, but you also have short range by column B. So if I say short range, it's only going to sort the section that I selected. It doesn't select does it do the test scores? No, it doesn't do the test scores. It just does what I selected. As long as you don't select stuff first, it's going to sort everything. So you kind of just got to accept that that's what it's doing, even if it's not necessarily obvious to you. If you really have if you're really worried that the data is not being sorted, you got to, like, before you do the sort, take a look at a particular person's data and remember what it is and see that it's changed with their positioning. You just kind of got to accept that that's what it does. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's go back into our printing options. Come on, where'd print go? Yeah, it's the icon there. Okay, so here we are in our printing. It's all set. So we got our spreadsheet over here. We're having this over here. And then we have a rest down here. So we want to make this look a little bit better as it's printed out. And the first thing we're going to do is we don't need this particular section of it hanging out. We don't need that included in our printing the thing. So we're going to change our print range to selected cells. But first we have to actually select those cells. So we're going to go back here. We're going to select all our cells. Oops. And then I'm going to go to the print option again. And this in the print up here, I'm going to change it from current sheet to selected cells, which would be A1 through F45. And notice that made that go away on our little section here. Okay, so now we're going to, this is looking a little bit better, but we have our problem on our second page that we don't have the testing, what these grades are. Our column headers have disappeared. So we want to get those over onto the next page. And if you worked in Excel, typically you would do here is you go in and you would set as a rows to repeat at top. Sheets is a little different because this is where freezing comes in again. So I unfroze those cells. I'm going to now refreeze them. See, view, freeze, one row. And now when I go to print, that row is repeating on the second page. So this is one of those areas where Excel and Sheets are kind of different. In Excel, freezing stuff usually doesn't do anything but change what you're seeing. In Sheets, freezing can affect how things are printed and also how things are sorted. So it's just something to keep in mind, that you might want to freeze rows in Excel when you wouldn't, in Sheets when you wouldn't do it in Excel. Okay, so now we have our rows there. Oh, and it changed and doing that changed our print range. It's highly irritating. Stick with one, don't change that. And go to selected cells. And now we have what we want printed on the page all set. Problem with this is we don't have any additional information. So we have a group of students, we have their test scores, we have no idea what class, what school, any of that information that's included in the, that we need to know to actually do anything useful with this. Some people will include that within the spreadsheet itself. I tend not to. I tend to prefer to put that kind of information into a header or a footer. Keeping your spreadsheet as clean as possible without a lot of extra pieces of text in it is usually very useful for, especially if you're going to be using this information within a different program, like say you're moving data between, say, a word processor and a spreadsheet. Having that spreadsheet be as clean as possible with not any extra pieces of text in it makes it easier for other programs to access the data and make sense of it. So we're going to put this information in the header and footer. So we're going to go over here to headers and footers. And we're going to start by doing a custom header. So here you see we have 3 sections on our header, and we can add text in 3 of them. So we're going to go here, and what we're going to put in here is the class title, which is Wolves in Myth. Oops. Myth and Folklore. And I'm actually going to make that, make that bigger. No, you really can't. I don't think you can do much with font, unfortunately, in Sheets for headers and footers. So that we have the class title. Over here, we're going to put in the semester, spring 2021. And the professor's name will go right here. Okay, so now our headers are done. You'll see here, right up here at the top. We're also going to be doing some footers. So I just added the page number to the footer by checking off that box. I can also add here the current date into the footer as well. Okay, and I think it went into the footer because we'd already set the custom header. Okay. One last thing we're going to do is, and it's going to be, all right. It's interesting. Okay, formatting. So let's say we're going to do, last thing we're going to do is we're going to make a little change to the alignment. So instead of having this sheet hanging over on the left-hand side, we're going to change it so that it's centered on the page. This looks a little bit nicer right now. There we have it. Okay, so then from click next, and depending on how your print's set up, you may be able to print directly to a printer, or if you have a different setup, or if you're using a different browser. Chrome tends to be pretty, when you're using Google Sheets and other Google products, Chrome tends to be pretty good about being able to send something directly to a printer. If you're using another web browser like Firefox or Edge, it tends to make you save it as a PDF before you print it out. And then so you'd have to save it as a PDF and then print the PDF. You can't go directly to the printer via your web browser if it's not Chrome, in most cases. Okay. So our sheet is all finished. Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, so no questions? All right then, thank you all for coming, and good luck with Google Sheets.
You didn't answer my question.
What's your question? I missed one. What's your question?
Would this particular sheet fit in portrait mode as opposed to landscape? I know you generally do want landscape for.
I actually think it defaulted to,
things.
I think it defaulted to landscape. That's why I didn't mention it. Yeah, it defaulted to landscape.
Okay, I'll play with it, but thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, thank you all for coming.